Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, a torrent of flame engulfs the daggermad junkies attacking BC, Sylfie, and Peona, declaring the arrival of a dangerous fire breather from the Four Families. But, as BC is about to learn, even within the old city, allegiances are never black and white. There was no one outside of the families who had that much power. Catching her breath, BC shouted out from where she hid, still in one of the alleyways. "Yo, you trying to fucking kill me too?" BC shouted. "I'm Velvet's head of security, fuckface!" There was a commotion somewhere back beyond the archway, and BC could suddenly hear Sylfie screaming out at someone, trying to explain that BC was with them and to hold their fire. Still being careful, BC tossed a rock out into the street, expecting a blast of flames in response. But when the torrent of fire didn't come, she peeked around the corner, zipping back, and then checking for a longer glance. Surrounding Sylfie and Peona were three men, each dark-skinned and dressed in the deep reds of the three flames. At their center, still wreathed in sparks like he was just waiting for a chance to turn her to ashes, was Drache, one of the head enforcers for the three flames, and one of the 5 or 10 strongest fire breathers between here and Teruvia. Sheathing her knives, BC walked out slowly, hands up and stepping into the archway. She met Drache's eyes as his men walked up to her and then past her, looking at the dying men. The two who BC had stabbed were still twitching, still gasping, and then suddenly flames lit the night as the three flames men burned the dagger dust-crazed attackers down to the bones. But BC kept her eyes on Drache, who still squinted at her, hands going alight. BC stopped about a dozen yards away, hands still raised. Any closer to him and she'd have no chance of getting out of the way if he attacked. "Thank you, Dragon," she said, adding the honorific for a warrior of the three flames. They usually liked that. "The 3 of them were tweaked out on dagger dust, probably trying to mug anyone they could and get money for more. Surely you can recognize me, though. I am Velvet's head of security." Drache squinted.
"I know who you are," he said. "I know a great deal about you."
Around him, the sparks wreathing the air grew angrier and started to swirl. "Then you'll know that we should have no trouble," BC said cautiously. Behind her, the other 2 men had finished dragging the charred bodies out into the street for cleanup, and froze in place at the angry sparks of their leader, which were growing by the second. BC felt their eyes on her, and then she felt the heat of both other Firelanders activating their gift. Fuck. Suddenly, despite the heat from all the Firelanders around her, BC felt the night get a little bit colder. The wind grew quieter, and a few torches began to dim. That was not good. And if Drache kept on, things would get much worse.
"The Machine King walks among the freemen,"
Drache said, stepping forward.
"He strikes against the innocent. You and we have a great deal of trouble."
BC took a step back, hands still raised to show that she wasn't trying to fight. Fuck. BC remembered. Drache's sister, Dachi, had been one of the girls taken from Crystal. Dachi had survived, but the experience of being kidnapped and strung up in the Machine King's display had been harrowing. And Firelanders did not take lightly to assaults on the blood of their blood. Things had already gotten worse. When BC next spoke, trying as best as she could to keep calm, her voice sounded distant, like someone else was talking. The Firelanders behind her had ignited even further, and yet now she felt no heat at all from the both of them. In fact, she was beginning to feel very little sensation from the world around her. "I don't know what you think I did," BC said, "but I have the same enemies you do."
There are whispers after your night in the eclipse that is not true. There are whispers that your history includes more about the Machine King than you have revealed to their families.
BC gritted her teeth. Had they always known about her history with Krona, or was letting this slip part of more of Krona's games? And how did an enforcer like Draka know something like that unless the families had begun to make it public knowledge? BC started breathing heavy, feeling the world close in around her, and behind Draka even the stars started to dim.
There are those who believe there would be a great deal less trouble if you disappeared,
Draka said, continuing to walk towards her. But now BC stood her ground. There was nowhere for her to go.
I am one of those people.
You could always count on Firelanders to be straightforward. Around them, the remaining lanterns on the street dimmed to nothing, leaving only the light of the Firelanders illuminating the street. And though she could see their mouths moving, BC couldn't even hear Sylfie and Peona's calls of protest. She put her head down, breathing heavier and heavier until even the sound of her own breath started to cut in and out periodically.
Do you have nothing to say, woman?
Draka said, stepping up so that the flames leaping to life in his hand stood right between them. They should have seemed hot, so hot that it would have made any reasonable person go scuttling away or cower or beg for mercy. But instead, BC stared down at the flames and then up at Draka. "Just this," she said, and suddenly grabbed him around both wrists. The flames still roared between the two of them, and as BC stuck her hands in the inferno to hold tight to Draka, she could see the hair on her hands going alight, and smell the acrid smoke fill both of their noses. Or, at least in theory. She couldn't feel anything now. She certainly couldn't smell anything. Holding tight, she smiled at him, and then pulled him forward, headbutting him in the nose, bursting it like a grape, and tackling him to the ground, coming up with her knife around his neck. The fire went out, and BC barked at the other two men, dragging Draka to his feet.
Just so you fucking know, we're on the same team, BC said. All of us, unless you just decided to wipe your ass with the Erasmus Pact.
She wasn't trying to put any conscience to the Three Flames men. Family underlings killed each other all the time. But even as quiet as town had been, the commotion had started to draw eyes, and BC raised her voice enough that even in her haze, she could tell that people around town were starting to notice. The families wouldn't want that big of an issue.
I think this is all just a big misunderstanding, BC said, loudly enough for any onlooker to hear, because she certainly couldn't. We're all a little high-strung after those dagger-dusted muggers, so why don't we all just go home?
In her arms, Draka started to heat up, but BC cut down into his skin.
You listen here, fuckface. I don't give a damn what side we're all on. If you threaten me again, I will fucking kill you. And then you will never be able to get the revenge on Krona that you need, which is what you seek, isn't it? That's what you want? Well, I want it too. All right?
Draka was silent, but BC could tell he was arguing with himself. She continued before he second-guessed or did something rash.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let you go. And then we're going to leave, and you can try to take your shot at me some other time. Let's set a date for it. You can try to fucking kill me any other time you want, just not while I am guarding two girls who have nothing to do with your bullshit. Does that make sense? Does that work for you, dragon?
Draka growled a curse, but he did not ignite any further.
Good, BC said. Now call off your boys.
Draka growled again, but after a pause, he barked something in Teruvian towards the men. Both of them looked confused, but then their hands went out, giving BC enough time to shove Draka away. By now, even the Firelanders realized the watching eyes that were on them. A few stray bodies in a scuffle, that was one thing, but outright murder of senior pit staff would take explaining. Not just from the men, but from the families, and they were not inclined to do much explaining. Regaining his poise, Draka turned back to BC, looking her up and down and then spitting on the ground.
I smoke only the truth, Draka said, and I do not fear what I say. We will meet again.
With that, Draka and his men swept past them and out into the night. BC watched them go, and then steadily made her way back to the girls, her mind spinning. Great, fucking great. She'd pissed off a family enforcer, but even more dangerous, she had almost lost control. The girls rushed over, asking if she was okay, noting the smell of burnt hair all over BC, but they had no further questions about why BC's hands were completely unburnt, like nothing had happened. Instead, they were just so grateful that Sylfie and Peona fussed and hugged and then eventually wept from the stress, all until BC put on a fake smile, made a fake quip, and picked up the bags again with fake confidence. With another few words of false bravado, she was walking forward, looking straight ahead and powering up the street. Partially, it was to avoid any mess from the aftermath of their conflict. Partially, it was for both of the girls to feel confident again, but mostly, it was so they would have no chance to see her black tattoos creeping down her wrists out to her fingers, creeping up her chest and around her neck. The two girls hurried along behind her, calling out, but BC did not look towards them, not once. Otherwise, they might have noticed that her eyes were starting to fade entirely to black. Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edera and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to Archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.